Hello everyone, my name is Magaddis and welcome to the fourth installment of a video series of the starting 6 classes for Gloomhaven 2nd edition. I'll be moving on to the Silent Knife here. Previously this class was known as the Scoundrel in the 1st edition. This is primarily a thematic change for the class as the focus and strengths that they have largely remain the same. I do apologize in advance as there's a pretty high chance here I accidentally called the Silent Knife by their previous name of the Scoundrel at points in this video, just something I'm very ingrained in me after 5 years of talking about this class. I do think overall, looking at the cards and abilities for Silent Knife, they have greatly benefited from the second edition changes. A lot has happened in the 8 years since Gloomhaven came out originally. The themes, balance, and cohesion of the class kits I've gotten to see thus far are a vast improvement, and Silent Knife is no exception to this. This video will function more of a review of the class, as I have not myself played the new version of Silent Knife. So my discussion will be more theoretical based on my experience playing the class in first edition and comparing their kit to what is now available in the second edition as well. Silent Knife has a 9-card hand size and a medium health pool, starting with 8 health here at level 1. Due to this, they function as a fairly glass cannon style character as they fit the rogue or assassin archetype, and the Silent Knife has very few ways to mitigate damage, having primarily offensive negative conditions such as wound or poison. They also have access to a small amount of muddle and invisibility, and at higher levels, a small dose of immobilize and disarm as well. They effectively have no supporting abilities in their kit. Their healing is for themselves, as is their invisibility. I start with the drawbacks for this class because they are highly specialized in doing two things: moving extremely quickly, both in their move actions and in their initiative, and having the clear strongest single target damage out of all the starting 6, or at the very least the most consistent highest damage, with a reasonable amount of area damage through multiple attacks and around as well. The Silent Knife starts as a primarily melee class that can transition and specialize in ranged attacks as well, which is a minor sub-theme in first edition, but has definitely been well fleshed out here and looks to be a brand new archetype overall. The Silent Knife has a truly absurd amount of mobility that is fairly unique, boasting a non-loss move 7 at mid-levels and having access to move 5s and move 6s early on. They also have a sub-theme revolving around looting and money tokens, and is the best equipped class for making a ton of gold, and even have perks that reference this as well. What this means is that a well-played Silent Knife will often scale extremely well with items and enhancements, which makes them a powerful ally to have as the campaign continues to progress. The Silent Knife's mechanics are fairly simple. Their really only unique mechanic revolving around gaining bonuses to their attacks against monsters that are either adjacent to any of your allies, not near any of their own allies. This is usually what I call like an isolation mechanic, and sometimes even both. This is easy to pull off, but relatively, but is a rewarding mechanic in larger party groups, can be difficult to manage in 2-player parties, especially if your partner is not melee, such as the Spellweaver or Tinkerer. So this is something to keep in mind when choosing what you want to play in your own campaign, as Scoundrel has had issues previously in 2-player campaigns, and their theme has only been strengthened in this series, so this will likely continue to be a weakness moving forwards. The Silent Knife had a minor sub-theme of dark, infusion, and consumption here as well, as they really only have one card that consumes dark, but a couple different ways to infuse it. They do, however, have a handful of ways to infuse the fire as well. This is only really here to help your allies, as essentially free elemental access they can use to consume for their own abilities. This mostly helps the Spellweaver, and the dark can help the Mind Thief if you don't need it yourself, or any other allies that may have ways to convert these elements into something more useful for them. This is really about as close to support abilities as you're going to get on the Silent Knife, but it is something. There's also a sub-build revolving around poison and getting additional payoffs against poison targets as well. This will really start coming online roughly in the mid-levels. Just like the Mind Thief before them, the Silent Knife wants to focus on some amount of initiative weaving, which is a concept when you go slow in early round, move in to hit your target near the end of the round to avoid retaliation, ideally finishing them off or heavily wounding them, and then going very quickly in the next round. If your target isn't dead, you attack them then. If they are already dead, you may move away, hit another target, or just kind of sprint out of combat altogether to try and avoid some attacks. Thankfully, the Silent Knife has access to a truly amazing initiative control. boasting cards as fast as 4 and as slow as 93 at level 1, and this control remains consistent throughout their level ups. While their cards may often appear simple, they are ruthlessly efficient and allow you to trailblaze through sessions quickly when played well. This reminds me somewhat of Blinkblade from Frosthaven with their slow and fast mechanic, and it's probably where the idea for Blinkblade came from, and it's sort of a hidden power to the class. You can absolutely choose when to go on a round quite often, which is in stark comparison to something like the Craigheart, who would literally move mountains for a couple cards in the 0 to 10 initiative range. I'll also say that unlike the Mind Thief, the Silent Knife can absolutely take some hits, as you have the medium health pool here, and slightly better access to healing as well as a few other forms of damage mitigation. However, as you only have a 9-card maximum hand size, I'd strongly advise against planning on using many losses with this class at all. You have a handful of powerful losses that can be worth using. However, I would recommend starting off by trying to limit losses to roughly once per scenario, ideally in the second half or even in the final room, until you're comfortable with the flow of how this class works. Your stamina by default is already lower than other classes, as you only get 4 turns per rest cycle immediately, with no way to recover cards, whereas most of the other starting 6 get at least 5 or even 6 rest cycles. Only exception here being Spellweaver, who functions very differently, of course, as they can recover all of their cards. All right, time to look at some cards. First one here is Flanking Strike. This definitely comes out of the gate strong as an attack 3. That becomes an attack 5, and you gain 1 experience if the target is adjacent to any of your allies. This is going to be a fairly stable bread and butter action for the Silent Knife, and is usually pretty easy to pull off as well. Again, easier in bigger groups, but NPC allies and even summons will count here, so this should be pretty easy to pull off overall. Communication with your party will be key with this class in general, as you will want to indicate to your party who you're attacking in the round. Initiative 4 here is obviously incredible, and it would make this card worthy even for that fact alone, but the top also really does want to go at the right time in the round anyways. This is best utilized when an ally is moved in or ended up next to a monster that didn't die in the previous round, as then you can guarantee you can get in there and hit the monster with your attack 5 before anything changes. And yeah, the bottom is a clean, simple move 5. No enhancement pip, which is definitely notable, but that is pretty normal for these Silent Knife cards. This card is just so emblematic of what makes Silent Knife good, as a move 5 is almost always a leveled card for other classes, and definitely wouldn't come stapled with a great top attack and an initiative 4 as well. There is a possibility this is simply Silent Knife's best level 1 card, as all 3 aspects of it are high quality, and playing exactly as to how you're expected to play this class early on. I do think that pretty much every Silent Knife will start off by being primarily melee with some ranged options, and you can continue to specialize in ranged attacks as you gain more levels. Our next level 1 card here is Practiced Reflexes. This is kind of Scurry's big brother from Mind Thief, as this is an incredible move 3 melee attack 3 top action. When combined with some of your bottom move actions, you can pretty easily end up moving 8 or even 9 hexes in a round with an attack 3 kind of in the middle of that. You could even, in theory, open up multiple doors with this kind of turn, which is obviously very risky, but you do have some access to invisibility. It is hard to imagine a scenario where I don't plan on bringing Practice Reflexes for the top, as this is quite literally 2 actions in 1 for some classes. It's definitely possible that a class just does a move 3, attack 3 in a round, and that's pretty normal. And you get this all in 1 action, which is obviously incredible. The initiative here being 64 is one of your worst, and it is an unfortunate reality with just how premium the top half of this card is, so I'm not too surprised. Bottom here is a move 3. It allows you to choose not to spring traps and hexes you enter with this movement. You can destroy a trap and a hex you entered with the move ability to gain 1 experience. So this is a little reference to Silent Knife kind of belonging to the rogue style archetype with disarming traps, and is great utility when combined with the staple top action here, as this is pretty free and doesn't really feel like it takes up a card slot at all, because you're going to be using this for the top half of it the vast majority of the time anyways. It'll come up every now and then, and you even get a bit of experience for your troubles, which is nice as well. Overall, I imagine pretty much every Silent Knife will want to pack Practice Reflexes in their starting kit, primarily for the top half. There's probably a world in which you don't bring it because the bottom and the initiative are both quite mediocre, but I think the top half will do some very heavy lifting early on for allowing you to move across the battlefield quickly. Next up, we have Quick Hands. This is a top loot 1 move 2. So this is our first example of Silent Knife's proficiency with getting gold better than other classes. This action is at absolute worst at least a top move 2, so it always has some value. But of course, a loot 1 being stapled on makes this pretty reasonable. Top loots are always better than bottom ones, as it's easier to reposition before getting the loot. And this even comes with repositioning after the loot action, so it works better with bottom attacks, big bottom moves to keep moving on to the next room, things like that. Initiative at 23 here would be fast for many classes, but is actually a little bit on the slow side of fast for Silent Knife, which does speak volumes to the initiative control this class has. They do have access to more fast actions than they do slow ones, so definitely pay attention when good cards with slow initiatives come up. Bottom here is a bottom attack 3, which is so good when you're already in the right position on a turn. Doing something like flanking strike top, quick hands bottom against a target next to an ally results in a cumulative attack 8, which is both very powerful and not even that hard to pull off. Don't sleep on a bottom attack 3. This isn't something many classes get access to in general at all. Next card here is Single Out. The top is going to feel very similar to Flanking Strike's top. It actually has the opposite condition, becoming an attack 5 with 1 experience if the target is adjacent to none of their allies, so that isolation I was talking about earlier. This is also the reverse of Flanking Strike for multiple reasons, as this is easier to pull off in smaller player counts or towards the end of a room, but is actually somewhat harder to pull off consistently in 4-player parties, simply due to there being a higher density of monsters in the same space. It is just one of those actions that you'll want to look for opportunities to leverage, as the Silent Knife primarily gets experience by doing their unique abilities, mostly from hitting isolated targets, disarming traps, and there are some range attacks that just give experience. Um, Most classes will often get a decent amount of experience simply from playing losses and or consuming elements, neither of which are super conducive to how the Silent Knife wants to play, as they have a small hand size and essentially interact very little with elements. Initiative 86 here is very noteworthy and is another big boon for this card, as it works really well to wait till later on in the round and maybe some of the monsters have already died, to hit an isolated target late, maybe polish them off. And it's also important for turns where you want to initiative weave to save yourself from taking some hits. Bottom is a semi-persistent loss. On your next 4 attacks targeting enemies adjacent to none of their allies, add +3 to the attack. This is actually probably my vote for the strongest loss to use in a scenario, especially towards the end, as this doesn't say specifically melee actions at all, so this does work with any range attacks you may have as well. And getting +3 to 4 isolated attacks is a lot of value as long as you can kind of get all 4 parts to this card before you exhaust or the scenario ends. This is actually pretty reasonable, especially for a level 1 loss, but of course is tempered by the fact that you really don't want to be playing many losses on this class. But overall, I do really like Single Out. I think it's definitely up there for one of Silent Knife's better actions at level 1. Next up is Sinister Opportunity. This top action is sort of a split between Single Out and Flanking Strike tops before it, with being an attack 3 that gets +1 if the target is adjacent to any of your allies, another +1 if the target is isolated, therefore adjacent to none of their allies, and you actually get advantage and 1 experience if both are true. An attack 5 with advantage, 1 experience, non-loss is kind of unprecedented, at least in the starting 6 for Gloomhaven 2nd edition. So this is obviously pretty incredible when it works out. However, of course, meeting both conditions can be tricky. This definitely requires some coordination with allies, so communication is big for this one. The other thing you'd probably want to keep in mind is that this is probably easiest against ranged monsters, as your frontline will often move up to be between the ranged monsters and the melees when they can. And this is usually easier to do at the end of the round slightly as well, as there only may be a monster or 2 left in the room, and your monsters, your allies may be positioned to said monsters to try and finish them off next round. So this is going to vary in its ease quite a bit. If it's only ever an attack 4, that's fairly medium, but still fine. And this isn't really going to only be an attack 3 very often as well. Initiative 93 here really works well for the top. As mentioned, this is likely to happen towards the end of a round. You can also just pair this with one of your really fast initiatives when it does line up early on, as we do have 5 cards coming up between the initiatives of 6 and 12, which is honestly wild. Bottom here is another clean move 5. Again, no enhancement pip. So jump is something you may struggle with early on. Wing shoes are definitely a recommendation for this class and are quite good on them. Like flanking strike before it, I love all 3 parts of Sinister Opportunity, and I definitely view this as a very premium level 1 card for this class. Next is Special Mixture. Top here is a heal 3 self, infuse the dark. Definitely a little unfortunate as the top action, as the vast majority of your premium actions in the middle of combat have been tops. So this will mostly only have value between rooms. It's definitely better in parties with more limited healing. This will come up more in like smaller parties without Tinkerer, or perhaps a healing focused Craigheart, things like that. Initiative 33 here is also quite poor for the Silent Knife. This isn't fast enough to like run away and patch yourself up before things go bad, not slow enough to heal after taking a hit, things like that. Bottom is a move 3, poison 1 target within range 1. This is your only value move action so far, in that it actually does something other than just be a big move or disarm a trap. And poison is very nice on this class and gets even better as you level up more, as you'll get access to cards that hit multiple targets or multiple times. And you also have a few cards that specifically key off poison. At level 1, you are going to have a small amount of access to poison through other cards, and Poison Dagger is also a recommended starting item on this class. So overall, I view Special Mixture to probably be your weakest card thus far, and it's a pretty easy cut if you don't need the healing or have no access to poison in other ways. As a Dark Infusion, it really only works for a single card period. It's one of your X cards, but that ability is also a loss. So it's not something you're going to need the dark for often, if ever, kind of regardless of how you play. Next, we have Swift Bow. This is an attack 3 at range 4, our first range action. It's hard to cut this kind of action as there are situations and scenarios where it may be difficult to engage in melee. And this is such a nice answer for things like big rooms where you cannot quite make it to your target. Range 4 is just so long. This is a really nice backup option for opening up a door when you don't know where the monsters are going to be too. This is just a really nice introduction to range attacks on Silent Knife, and attack through range through would be about standard. So getting the extra range here with a nice enhancement pip is a big plus for this card. Initiative 36, just like Special Mixtures 33 before it, is definitely awkward. As neither half of this card needs to go particularly fast, that's not the hugest deal. Still not ideal, however. Bottom is a move 3. You loot each hex you entered with the move ability. This action existed in Gloomhaven First Edition, but the move ability here has been up from 3 to 2 base. As this can be enhanced, and there are boot items that enhance your movement as well, it's going to end up being a move 4, move 5, or maybe even move 6, which gets really silly for getting a bunch of money between rooms. You get that gold, make your character stronger, rinse and repeat. This is definitely a kind of a fan favorite. I know a lot of people online like this action a lot. It's pretty fun. Second up here, we have Throwing Knives. This is your other range attack at level 1. It's a nice staple. Attack 2, target 2, range 3, with 1 free experience on there no matter what. This is one of your only ways to hit multiple targets early on, the other being Quick Hand's bottom attack. So this has a lot of value just in shoring up a definite level 1 weakness of this class. Their area damage starts off quite limited and then continues to improve with levels. This is even more pronounced for the ranged build. I like that this is a range 3 and not range 2, as it's pretty easy to still hit 2 targets while avoiding disadvantage from hitting a target next to you with a range attack. It also, the fact that it always gives 1 experience is kind of nice. I do foresee some Silent Knives having some trouble gaining experience if they aren't able to meet their conditional experiences easily, and especially if you aren't playing many losses, if you're a more conservative player such as myself. So it's nice that this always gives some. Initiative 10 here is another banger. Quickly dispatch a monster or 2 before they can react in a round with the top action. It's good to have another fast one, although the rest of the cards that we'll be reviewing for level 1 and X here are of a similar speed. So this is slightly less vital than normal. Bottom here is a pull 2 at range 3. This really sets up the isolated conditions as well as the adjacent to an ally conditions we've seen previously. So you can drag a monster next to an ally and you, and perhaps away from its allies. This will look pretty weak at first glance, but I actually really like that it's in the arsenal here at level 1, and it will play better than it looks. Because if you do this properly, this is kind of like adding +2 or +1 to your attack by setting up your conditional bonuses. You can also enhance the range on the pull for quite cheap if you end up using it a lot, or even the range, depending, as both have a +1 enhancement pip here on the bottom. Overall, throwing knives has been a great top action in previous editions. It's a stable initiative and a very solid bottom action, so I definitely think it's in the upper echelon of Silent Knife level 1 cards for me. Venom Shiv is next. This is an attack 3, pierce 1, poison on a melee attack. This is a solid setup attack to get 3 to 4 damage in pretty consistently with the pierce 1 added in here. And the poison tacked on as well is best against higher health targets. Elites, naturally tankier monsters such as things like living corpses, that'll take a couple hits to kill. This is often going to be a solid stable attack, and it's nice that it always does its thing. No positioning or isolation requirements to make this a good card. This will often result in it being a very solid round 1 play, kind of to start off a scenario. Initiative 8 here is awkward specifically if you're doing this as an early room attack, as you often don't want to sprint into a pack of monsters that fast. However, that is a great initiative on other turns. So you may actually want to pair this with one of your slower initiatives in the above scenario where you're using it right away. But overall, Initiative 8 is obviously great. Bottom is a round ability that adds +2 Pierce to all of your ranged attacks this round. As mentioned before, this does only work with 2 of your cards at level 1, but this will continue to scale in relevance as you gain levels. As at some level ups, you are going to primarily have ranged options, and especially if you decide to specialize in the ranged build, this just continues to get better and better. It's also particularly potent with throwing knives at level 1, as that is 2 attacks that you're getting +2 pierce on, and actually makes it a very solid attack. This also gets pretty insane with a loss you're offered at level 3. So overall, I like both halves of Venom Shiv as well as the initiative. I think this is a really solid attack, and I like that both halves have Pierce, which is pretty rare on this class. The top is your best source of poison at level 1, to tie to the good initiative here as well. For our first level X card, this is Backstab. The top is a loss. It is an attack 5 base. You get +2 if you consume the dark, and +2 and gain 1 experience, 2 experience total, if the target is adjacent to any of your allies. So this will range from a 5, but hopefully a 7 or 9. This is your only card in all of Silent Knife that actually can consume the dark. So as mentioned, this is a fairly niche action and not one I'm super excited about, although an attack 7 or 9 is going to be fine, particularly in later rooms of the scenario, but definitely not a loss that I'm jumping out of my seat to use, and especially not early, as going down to an 8-card hand right away is definitely not advisable. Initiative 6 here is your second best and does work well with the top for its situational nature due to needing the dark and a target adjacent to any of your allies to really be ideal. And it's also fine for the bottom here as well. This is premium. It's just not critical like it would be for other classes because you have so much access to fast initiatives comparatively. The bottom here is the move 6. Again, no enhancement pip. It is your only move 6 at level 1. Move 6 is so incredibly good that I think the Silent Knife's lack of pips on their move actions is quite fair, as otherwise enhancing many of them with jump would really break open a lot of scenario types. Out of our X cards for Silent Knife, I think Backstab is the strongest and the most likely to be included in many main decks, mostly for the bottom move and the great initiative, but you really don't figuratively pay much for the top action here, as the bottom and the initiative are both just so good. For our second X cards here, we have Smoke Bomb. Top is our last loss at level 1, turns you invisible, doubles the value of the next attack while you have invisible, gives you 2 experience, and infuses the dark. This does obviously combo with Backstab for an attack 18, provided you can meet its other condition. That is 2 different losses and would really only be reasonable in boss scenarios, as you're spending 2 of your 9 cards to kill 1 target otherwise. I think Smoke Bomb, like Backstab's Loss, is mostly reserved for the final room of a scenario, to combine with one of your conditional attack 5s to make them an attack 10. It's not super necessary, but it is fun and splashy. The invisibility will also be nice sometimes, especially if the scenario is getting hard to manage and you really just need to kill something problematic. Initiative 12 here is solidly fast for the Silent Knife, but not an incredible. It's honestly insane as I'm saying this, because 12 is truly premium on many classes. Silent Knife is just fast. Bottom is a move 4. Control 1 adjacent enemy to perform a move 1. This movement must end in a hex adjacent to you. This will mostly be used to set up one of your Isolate or Ally adjacent payoff cards like we've seen at previous. This is actually potentially a little better than some of your move 5s because it has a very big movement that also does something else and makes your other cards easier to use. So I'm definitely a big fan of Smoke Bomb's bottom here. And it is possible that this is just better than one of your other move 5s, depending on what you're bringing into the scenario. Overall, I think Smoke Bomb is a fairly middle of the road card to possibly a bit on the lower end, mostly just because the top doesn't have a lot of text. And Initiative 12 is very replaceable in this class at level 1. So really, you're going to be packing a few fast cards kind of no matter what you do. So really, this boils down to a move 4 with some upside with a very replaceable effect otherwise. Next up, and our final level 1 and X card is Trickster's Reversal. On your next melee attack targeting an enemy that has a shield, add X plus 2 attack, where X is the shield value of the target. This will usually end up being roughly 3 to 4 bonus damage, of course, less their shields. This also gives you an experience when used, and it's a persistent non-loss, which is quite neat. So it'll just sit in your active zone until used, look for the next attack against a shielded target, and then apply its effect. This is a very conditional effect, but it is one of your only ways to augment your damage between rooms, and is definitely very powerful in the right situation. There are some monsters, even at low levels, that have something like 2 shields, so adding 4 damage to your attack is pretty potent, although of course this does take up your top action. So again, between rooms or at the very first part of a scenario is probably ideal to put this up. Again, you don't want this to sit in your active zone for too long, ideally not between rest cycles, as that is just taking a card away from your stamina on already a low card hand size. So do try and use this as quickly as possible, and don't just put it up just because. If there is no shielded targets, this isn't going to get any value for you as it never triggers otherwise, so do keep that in mind. Initiative 9 here, again, nice and fast, not particularly out of line for Silent Knife, but a good solid initiative. It's very relevant for the bottom half and is essentially irrelevant for the top. Our bottom here is you negate the next damage you would suffer this round. This is from any source of damage, so while this is likely to be from an attack, it could also be from something like a trap that you move over with something like a top move action. This is going to pretty wildly vary, as sometimes this is going to get popped by a monster doing an attack 1 or 2, whereas other times this may save you something like 6 life from a living corpse attack. So really this is a pretty situational card, but I do like that it's available at level 1 and neither half is a loss, because ultimately this provides extra utility for the Silent Knife and it gives them things to do in combat that aren't just attacking or moving. So I think Trickster's Reversal is kind of a textbook definition of an X card here. It is really good against well-shielded or heavy-hitting monster types, and this is a card you should be reviewing as to whether or not you should bring in most scenarios. I just don't think it'll really ever make the main deck of any given player, although I could see some relevance for both the bottom and the initiative in most scenarios. The top could absolutely be a blank sometimes, especially at lower difficulty levels. So overall, I think Trickster's Reversal is a really nice X, just not something I'm looking to main deck really often at all. Level 1 card choices here. This is a bit of a doozy, as with only a 9 card hand and 12 cards total, the card quality is of course a little higher here, but I do see 4 or 5 cards that will often be solid choices to cut to start. I think all 3 X cards are reasonable cuts. However, I really do like Backstab. I think Smoke Bomb sits in the middle, as I really like the bottom action. And as mentioned before, Trickster's Reversal really should never make your main deck, or at least not very often at all. But something you should be bringing in whenever you're starting scenarios. It can absolutely overperform in the right situation. Since you'll be wanting to bring in sometimes one or two of the X cards depending on your play style, I'll recommend a few level 1 cards to look at for potential cuts when you're looking to bring these cards in or maybe even start them. Special Mixture definitely stands out to me as a potential cut. The heal 3 self top action is pretty mediocre as it's only for yourself, and the bottom action is merely a fine source of poison, being that move 3, poison 1 adjacent target. I also see opportunity to cut throwing knives, especially in scenarios with higher shields on monsters. However, it is your really only area attack early on. Finally, Venom Shiv is fairly cuttable, especially when you cut throwing knives, as the bottom action adding Pierce 2 to your range attacks only works with 2 of your cards at level 1, one of which is throwing knives itself. Depending on card choices, you may have a fairly limited access to poison based on these cuts, so that does add more relevance to Poison Dagger as a starting item, which of course we'll be talking about next. There is a lot of good options for Silent Knife for items, so I'm going to go through and discuss a bunch of different ones, as I don't think there's any singular option here, which is honestly great to see. I think Wing Shoes is a real standout, though, as it is your only source of jump and will likely be so for a long time. Positioning on this class is truly key. There's a few of the starting classes that like Wing Shoes, so definitely discuss this with your party to see who needs them most, as there is only 2 copies of Wing Shoes for larger player counts. Stamina Potion is also really strong in this class. Your small hand size and odd number at hand both make Stamina Potion better. And buying back a key action, such as one of your big moves, one of your attack 5s, or even a ranged attack will be really nice. Of course, as discussed quite a bit already, Poison Dagger is going to be very key at early levels for this class, as you only have 2 sources of access to poison at level 1. Both I have floated being as a possible recommendation for cuts. And poison works so well with this class as you continue to level up. At level 1, it may not seem super important, but as you continue to grow, you're going to get access to more and more multi-attacks, multi-target attacks, things that can hit the same target multiple times. You do already have a little bit of this with throwing knives and the bottom attack. However, poison is also a sub-theme on this class, and so just having access to a way to always poison on any given melee attack is going to be great. Of course, Poison Dagger loses some relevance in the ranged build, so this is something to keep in mind as well. Leather armor is always solid on mid-range characters. You're definitely going to take some hits on this class as you're moving in and out of combat, and any way to mitigate your fairly low health pool and fairly low access to healing is going to be appreciated as well. There's even an argument for Scouting Lens, which is a item that you can spend to add Pierce 1 to a range attack. This is one of the only ways to actually add damage to your attacks, Poison Dagger being the other one, through the Pierce. However, it does only work for range attacks against shielded targets, which is both fairly limited at level 1. Just like the Mind Thief, Fur Armor is not recommended on this class, as you cannot remove the -1s it gives you for your attack modifier deck through perks. In fact, you don't have access to ignoring negative scenario effects nor negative item effects on this class. First level 2 is Open Wound. We start strong here with a nice clean attack 4. Gain wound and 1 experience if the target is adjacent to any of your allies. So this is kind of an in-between when comparing to your attack 3 conditional attack 5s like Flanking Strike at level 1, with a higher floor and a slightly or comparable ceiling here. Wound is definitely very similar to +1 attack and is sometimes better, so this is probably closer to a direct upgrade. Initiative 11 here is fantastic, although at this point fairly repeatable, as this is, again, just something that the Silent Knife has very good access to, but is by no means a bad thing either. Certainly better than a 40, 50, or 60, which we're going to see a lot on other classes. That just doesn't come up all that often on Silent Knife. Bottom here is an attack move 6. This is something you've only had 1 card of access to before. Again, no enhancement pip. This is very strong and simple, but again, just like Flanking Strike, all 3 portions of it are very strong. So if you wanted another slightly improved copy of one of what I would say is one of your best level ones. That is essentially what Open Wound is. And when you have a 9-card hand, this just makes your actions very consistent, which is definitely a good thing. Our other option here is Stick to the Shadows. Top is a very cool semi-persistent non-loss. Very used to these being losses, and this is very notable that it isn't. It adds +1 and poison to your next 3 attacks. Do note here that this just says attacks, so it keys off of both melee and ranged attacks, which is fantastic for this card. With some actions like throwing knives, you may burn through these charges very quick. Throwing knives, for example, would burn through 2 of the 3 charges, as this is attacks, not attack actions. So both of the attacks of throwing knife would get +1 in poison here. But if you can hit 3 different targets with this persistent each rest cycle, this represents a lot of value that you can do every single time you recover it. It's also very notable this is something you can do before you engage in combat, which is beginning of the scenario, near the end of a room, or even between rooms to power yourself up, as this has been very limited for the Silent Knife before now. So this does hold a lot of value, and if you have any interest in the poison sub-build, this feels like a very good way to enable that, as it works with both melee and ranged, as there's a decent few of your poison options so far that have really only been limited to melee, such as Venom Shiv Top, as well as the Poison Dagger item. So this is probably the easiest way to get poison on the ranged build. Initiative 26 here is on the poor side of fast for Silent Knife. I'd actually prefer this card to be slower for the top, although that would make the bottom worse as it wants to go as fast as possible. Regardless, for either half of this card, this is not an ideal initiative, and you should definitely be pairing this with a slower one if you want to use the top, and a much faster one if you want to use the bottom. Bottom is a move 3. If you end this movement adjacent to no enemies, you gain invisible, and then at the end of the round you lose the invisible, so this is half the duration of normal invisibility. But this is quite nice as it is just tied to a move action and is a pretty easy condition to do after said move action. What this does mean is that this will mostly be a defensive reactive action. That'll be mostly reserved for when like a monster pulls an ability card that you can't really deal with, or you just want to avoid in general. So the top here is a bread and butter action that really adds a lot of damage every breath cycle. It's combined with a situationally useful bottom action. I generally view that as a recipe for success. If I'm very priced into one half of the card, but the bottom half is very good in the right situation, then that usually makes it a pretty solid card. For me, I think I slightly value Stick to the Shadows more than Open Wound. Open Wound is very much doing exactly what the Silent Knife wants to do and is a strong card. However, both Houses of Stick to the Shadows here are new, novel things for you to be doing with this class, and they are both good, staple things that you want to be doing as you gain levels. I like that both halves work for essentially any build on this class, so it's got a lot of versatility there. Whereas Open Wound's top, again, is primarily for melee, and the move 6, while very good, is fairly replaceable. We do already have a move 6, as well as many move 5s and even a few move 4s. So for me, I think I'll be going with Stick to the Shadows at this level, although I do not fault anyone for taking Open Wound. I think this is a very good card as well. At level 3, we have Flintlock. This is our first payoff for diligently collecting all those money tokens. It's an attack 3, range 2 muddle, that if you place one of your money tokens in the hex occupied by the target, gets to add +2 pierce 2. It also always infuses the fire. So this is an attack 5, pierce 2, range 2 muddle, as long as you have a money token that you can kind of donate to the target. This is very much top tier when you can utilize the money token and quite mediocre without, but this should really not be much of an ask on this class. Ultimately, the range 2 here is a little awkward, as unless you're specifically at range 2, you're going to be at disadvantage. So that is something to keep in mind. The muddle may really not have a ton of relevance if you're often killing the target with an attack 5, but at least they are muddle if they do survive. The fire infusion is trinket text for this class and really only matters for other classes in your party. The initiative at 51 here is also your worst initiative at any level up. Definitely a downside of this class, as the top wants to go fast and the bottom would ideally go slower than this. The bottom is a move to loot 1, and then you can create a mobilize poison trap in the empty hex of any one looted money token. I do like this as this actually sits at the top half of the same card on Flintlock. So right at the end of a rest cycle, you can use the bottom, grab a money token, do a short rest or a long rest, grab Flintlock back, and then use that money token to hit something and probably kill it. The trap is mostly just kind of free and tacked on here, as a move 1 loot 2 is already pretty okay. You'll mostly be able to utilize the trap with a couple pull actions you have, but it's really better for your allies. Allies such as Mind Thief and Tinkerer can definitely appreciate traps utilized with their cards. So ultimately, I think Flintlock has two reasonable halves, definitely held back by a poor initiative, but overall a solid option. The other option here is Hidden Daggers, Dagger, Dagger, Dagger. This is just a really, really powerful top loss. 5 attack, 2 range 3s that can all hit the same target, or even different targets depending on what you need. As they're each separate attack actions, you can just hit something and then change targets if they drop. This may look a little mediocre at face value. However, you do have the bottom action of Venom Shiv to add Pierce 2 to all 5 attacks. And your perk deck on Silent Knife is of such a high quality, this can pretty easily result in something like 10 to 15 damage, some negative conditions, even some invisibility for yourself, even more at the right setup. This is a lot better than a single target attack 9 or something like that, as it's much better with poison. You're far more insulated from rolling your null as you get 5 kicks at the can, and you could polish off 2 to 3 targets pretty consistently with this with the right setup. Despite all of what I just said, this is still a loss on a 9-card hand, so you can't just take a card simply like this for the loss alone. It does need to do more than that to not be dead weight for the first roughly 50 to 75% of the scenario, as you're going to be using this in the back half a decent portion of the time. Initiative 39 here is pretty awful, but at least it's not the 51 of Flintlock before it. You'll definitely want to pair this with a fast action when you decide to use the top. And honestly, the bottom does want to go fast as well. Thankfully, you have access to so many good fast actions. This really shouldn't be too much of a problem. Bottom is an attack 1, target 2, range 3, each attack becoming an attack 2 instead if that target is adjacent to none of its allies, so the isolation condition here again. This is a great payoff for leveraging your isolation theme well, and as it's a range 3 attack, this should be pretty reasonable to pull off, especially as you have numerous top moves if you need to get in position to hit a different target. And you get more of this kind of thing as you level up. I really do like that both halves of this card want to be in the ranged build, so it's quite specialized for that. It means that you can use this for the bottom half most of the time, and then just kind of pop off and delete a decent chunk of the room at the top when it lines up, when you've got the poison and the pierce available, things like that. So as far as the level 3 card choice, I think Hidden Dagger having 2 halves that shore up a definite weakness to low-level Silent Knives, namely their lack of area damage, is a huge selling point for it. It has the better initiative and, in my opinion, is the more cohesive card, as the bottom of Flintlock with the move Loot Trap is a little random and not necessarily always something you want to be doing. I will say that Flintlock's top is definitely very strong with the money token available, which is not difficult at all with this class. And this is something new that they're kind of experimenting with this class. However, the initiative is very poor and the bottom is just merely fine. It is a little awkward here that none of the 4 actions on offer are very good for a melee focused Silent Knife at all. So I think Flintlock is better for that, as it is short ranged with a fine bottom action. But I do like the explosive power of Hidden Daggers here a lot. Both halves are pretty easy to use at range 3, and unlock the ranged build so easily in a single card choice when combined with Throwing Knives, Swift Bow, and Venom Shiv bottom from level 1. I do think this is primarily going to come down to a preference choice here, depending on which route you want to take with this class, as both are good options. Stick to the Shadows top just pairs so nice with Hidden Dagger on both halves, that I think I'll be trying that out myself. I definitely want to try out Flintlock at some point, mostly for that top action, as I do really like the idea of playing with money tokens. And you'll see, I think it's one or two more cards coming up that play with money tokens as well. So this is kind of a cool little mini sub-theme for the Silent Knife. At level 4, our first choice here is Flurry of Blades. This is essentially throwing Knife's bigger, cooler sibling as an attack to target 3. Range 3 is big game when combined with multiple sources of poison and or pierce. So this will be Stick to the Shadows top, Venom Shiv bottom for the pierce. At this point, monsters are often going to have a point of shields, so without either poison or pierce, this definitely falls off a little bit. But you should easily hit 2 to 3 targets with this pretty much every time. So you are just flipping a lot of modifiers. It also just always gives an experience, which is quite nice. So overall, very solid top action. Plays well into what any ranged Silent Knife is going to want to do. It's also probably a fine pickup from melee Silent Knives, just to have something to hit targets, as mentioned before, with range attacks, when opening a door, near the beginning of a room if you can't quite make it to your targets, that sort of thing. Initiative 16 here is good, but not incredible, which is honestly an insane statement because so many classes would just pick Initiative 16 if it had anything else really going on for it. So this class's initiative control is definitely warping my sense of what is normal at this point, but 16 is just good but fine for the Silent Knife. This is the above mentioned move 7 non-loss for this class and is very notable for being our first move action that, or at least big move action, that has an enhancement pip. So you can make this a move 7 jump, which is pretty pricey, but absolutely worth it as it's simply a loss on other classes. And who can afford pricey enhancements if not the Silent Knife? Other card here is Gruesome Advantage. This is an attack 4 that becomes an attack 6 if the target is either isolated or adjacent to any of your allies, giving 1 experience. So this is really not hard to do when either condition works. So this is very close to an attack 6 1 experience, non-loss, which is very efficient. Initiative at 90 here is great, as none of our level ups have enabled us to go slow. This is very notable and is a very strong perk for this card. It even works well with both halves, so the synergy is pretty high here. Bottom is a move 3. When you next perform a melee attack targeting an enemy that has poison this round, after the attack ability, perform attack 2, range 3 poison. This is a huge payoff for the poison sub build. However, I am disappointed it has to be a melee attack that triggers this, although I suppose it would be too strong otherwise and a little bit too free. It does go without saying this action will swing from your worst bottom action to your best, depending on whether or not you can meet that second condition there. And obviously fully hinging on whether or not you can trigger that free attack. As it's priced as a full free level 1 top action for some classes, such as Tinkerer, to do an attack 2 range 3 poison. There's just a ton of value with a bottom move action. I will say that this is kind of a strange intersection as it wants you to do a melee attack, but then is a ranged attack itself. So this is something where you're probably not hitting the same target as the melee attack because that would be a disadvantage. So there are a couple things that need to line up here for Gruesome Advantage's bottom, but it is so efficient when you can do so. For level 4 card choice here, this is tough because I actually like all 4 actions, with Flurry of Blades being a little bit more consistent in what it does, whereas Gruesome Advantage will pretty wildly swing for the bottom, but at least the top half is very consistent. Any melee-focused Silent Knife is just going to take Gruesome Advantage here. Flurry of Blades is solid for the ranged build, and the move 7 is so massive, it really is hard to pass that up. The biggest qualifying factor here might end up being which initiative you want, as 16 versus 90 is definitely the ends of the spectrum. 16 is also far less notable for our class at this point, as 90 is a lot more premium due to being the rare slow one. I do personally plan on trying to enhance the move 7 on Flurry of Blades to be a move 7 jump. So I want to try Gruesome Advantage at some point for the bottom action as well, because it looks so good if you can consistently do this. It's just a ton of value on a bottom action, but is fairly conditional. But I do like that it has the top bailout here. And it's not even a bailout, it's an attack 6. It is quite good. Overall, with my previous card choices for myself, I'll be taking Flurry of Blades here. I really want to try Crisp Advantage. I think the card looks dope. And both tabs are great with a great initiative. Even as I'm saying this, I'm wondering if I should be taking Crisp Advantage. I really struggle to pass up on move 7 that I can get to a jump. It relieves so much pressure on your other cards if you can simply do 2 full move actions in 1 turn. At level 5, we have Duelist's Advance. The top is a move 3, attack 4, move 2, which is insane. This is legitimately a loss action on other classes, usually on the bottom half of a card. And the fact that this is at worst roughly a move 5 top with a very free attack 4 means a lot of your conditional attack 5s are starting to look pretty weak, which they simply aren't. All 3 parts of this having enhancement pips of the highest quality is also pretty cute here. You can really put whatever you want on these actions. I like this card starts in such a strong position and with money can just get even better. It's definitely a little bit theoretical as the cost would get pretty silly, but imagine getting poison or wound on the attack with a jump on the move 3 here. It's just so much value for 1 action that you can do every single rest cycle. This card also has a blazing fast initiative 7, so you get to hit, move, bottom attack with quick hands or something like that, all initiative 7 here. This is just so crazy and really, really nice to kind of shore up what is already a very mobile class, but just make their even more specialized into what they're already doing. You could very easily move 10, 11, even 12 hexes in a turn with the Duelist Advance combined with one of your move 5, 6, or 7s. Frankly insane. And there are some more escape style scenarios where this could obviously just kind of break it open. The bottom is strangely similar to the top and somehow kind of worse at everything, which is definitely interesting, as it is a move 4, pull 1, range 2. This does, as previously mentioned with pulls, set up your isolate or ally adjacent payoff card, so this has its place, particularly when it's at a fast initiative, but it'll definitely feel bad when the top half is almost strictly better. So you're really going to end up using the top half when this, I'd say something like 90 to 95% of the time. With that being said, it is so powerful that I don't know how much that matters, especially when paired with a nice fast initiative here. So really the bottom could have no text and I'd probably still take this card pretty happily. Other choice here is Serrated Arrow. It's an attack 4, range 3 wound with the same diamond enhancement pip, meaning this can take any negative condition or a +1, which is really nice. Obviously, this pales a little bit in comparison to Duelist Advance. Wound application does start off pretty scarce and gets a little better, and much better at level 9, which means the wound here is pretty premium as you're not going to have a lot of access to it. This is essentially 1 damage higher than Duelist Advance, maybe 2 with the wound, but you are trading 5 movement for it. Of course, range versus melee definitely has some relevance here. This is overall a fine action and would be pretty exciting if it weren't against one of the strongest actions on this class, period. Initiative 95 here is once again really, really massive. I do appreciate that we have 2 slow, great initiatives at 4 and 5, as it adds so much texture and nuance to these leveling decisions, because this card is really hinging on the fact that it has a good staple top action, as well as a really nice slow initiative, and something that you very well might need at this point. Bottom is a persistent loss, sort of. On your next next attack targeting an enemy that's both adjacent to any of your allies and none of its allies, you double the value of the attack. You gain 2 experience, and this goes to your loss pile. This feels very similar to Smoke Bomb from level 1. It is a bottom action. It doesn't rely on you being invisible, so it is easier to pull off. However, by level 5, this is definitely below par, as your highest reasonable single attack action is 6, backstab notwithstanding, because it is another loss. Looking ahead, it doesn't get any better than that. So an attack 12 is fine between the top and the bottom loss here, but for a loss that has 2 conditions, that's not terribly exciting. So really, this is fairly medium. This level up decision does kind of suck because Duelist Advanced Top is so good it makes the rest of the options really kind of feel bad by comparison. Flurry of Blades into Duelist Advance means that you do pass on both the slower initiatives if you took that at the previous level, which will feel pretty important by this point in your career. I do think it's reasonable to consider coming back for one of the two slow initiatives in the next level or two, especially depending on the strength of the cards and just what your Silent Knife needs at this point. I do think Serrated Arrow's top is absolutely serviceable, and between that and the Great Slow Initiative is a good card. But the bottom being quite weak is definitely a bit of a problem for me as it makes the card more two-dimensional and less three-dimensional. Um, I'm probably going to end up taking the value town that is Duelist Advance at level 5, but I definitely see a world in which I come back for Serrated Arrow, or possibly even Gruesome Advantage from the previous level up, as I do at this point need a slow initiative. Based on my card choices, I have not taken either of them. So I could definitely see a world in which you want to take a look at your level 6s, see if you like them. If you aren't a huge fan, I would actually take Serrated Arrows at this level to get the late initiative now, and then grab Duelist Advance when coming back at a future level up. At level 6 here, we have Cull the Weak. Top is an attack 5, turning into an attack 6 with advantage 1 experience if the target is a normal monster. This is a new conditional that I wasn't quite expecting. You'll generally see more monsters in 2 and 4 players. Sometimes in 3 as well. It does vary scenario by scenario. This does make it pretty interesting, as your party makeup will often determine just how good this is. With that being said, I think that Silent Knife is already quite good at killing normal monsters, and elites are often far more problematic for parties in general. So this is good, but not crazy efficient here. Initiative 62 is very poor. It's not fast enough to kill the target before they act, and not slow enough to guarantee not taking hits back after moving in. Bottom is an attack 2. Target 2 enemies whose current hit point value is 2 or less at range 2, and then you get to perform a loot 2. I kind of hate that this is both highly conditional and only range 2 as a bottom action. You're going to need to set this up with a top move a large portion of the time to actually have this make it sense, as otherwise you're going to be at a disadvantage against people next to you. And there's a large portion of the time you won't be able to use this anyways, as the initiative is poor. The monster's health is likely to be higher or lower than 2 by the time you get to go in a given round, which means you not only need to pair this with a fast initiative, but a card that makes sense with it as well. This really only works while the Duelist's Advanced top, as Practice Reflexes, your other top move action, is a really slow initiative at 64 as well, which doesn't solve your problem. The loot 2 being at least not tied to the rest of this card is a slight improvement over it, but I just can't see packing a card where I'm not excited about really any of the portions of the card, except for a loot 2 and a generic attack 5 on the top, at least at this point in your career, and for the Silent Knife, who's been doing attack 5 since level 1, and I just can't take a level up card simply for it to be a loot 2 a decent part of the time. The other option here is Dance of Daggers. Top is a round loss. You negate damage and added effects of all attacks targeting you this round. Immediately after each attack ability targeting you this round, gain 1 experience and perform an attack 2, targeting the enemy that attacks you. This is very neat and new territory for Gloomhaven in general. As far as I'm aware, you've never been able to negate added effects of attacks targeting you in addition to the damage dealt. So this is typically going to be negative conditions, but even works against things like push and pull. This is very out of left field for Silent Knife in general, as this isn't really your role within the party, and is also, again, very conditional. I'm probably going to end up viewing this as something like ignore the next 4 or 5 sources of damage you take this round, and then kind of a weird quasi Retaliate 2 at infinite range. It is different than Retaliate 2 as it is an attack, so shields work against it, but you get to flip an attack modifier. And of course works with poison, so it's very hard to qualify this really in any reasonable way, as this is quite different. Um, when this works out and you get to hit 4 or 5 things and fully negate the damage the monster's doing around is going to be nice. But the reality is that monsters multi-target. They may not attack you, as you simply may not be the closest to them, that sort of thing. Um, so this card only working a fairly small percentage of the time is not exciting for a top action, especially for a lost in a 9-card hand. So very odd, but definitely unique, and I like that they're exploring new ground with things like this. Initiative 3 here makes absolutely perfect sense for the top. It does improve your chances of it working out by a little bit. It also works really nice with the bottom, which is quite good as well. So the bottom is move 4, gain advantage in all of your attacks this round. Holy crap, is this a good action? Finally, some good food at this level. This is an absolute staple and works really well with the range build, as you'll often be making 2 or 3 attacks in a round, and getting all of those attacks with advantage is very crazy and is obviously similar to Strengthen. Um, this is the kind of action that works well with basically any Silent Knife, and the fact that it's just with a clean move 4 on initiative 3 really does make this look better than maybe it initially appears. Advantage is something you have had very little access to on this class. A couple single target cards that have had it conditionally. So be able to apply this to literally any attack on this class is great. This is also truly insane with a level 9. If it looks like you're going to be this class for a long time, I would recommend picking up Dance of Daggers for the bottom half because it is very, very strong. For level 6 card choice here, I definitely think this is a bit of a strange one, as I'd think the level 6s are generally worse than the level 5s. The only exception this being the bottom of Dance of Daggers here. I unfortunately just really don't like what Call Week is trying to offer. I think the attack 5 is fine. Attack 6 with advantage is against the weakest targets, the normal monsters that you can often kill anyways. The initiative is poor. And as mentioned before, the bottom is very conditional and will really just end up being a loot to a reasonable portion of the time, which is just such a bad floor on a level 6 card. So I think for most people, this is actually going to be a decision for Dance of Daggers versus going back for the level 5 you didn't take. As much as it pains me, I probably have to go back for a late initiative at this point and grab serrated arrows, as I have ignored all the slow initiatives on level ups, and I'm only going to have a couple available to me. With a 9-card hand, I'm also cutting more of my level 1s than your average class, so I'm only going to have a handful of those left at this point. So that is definitely some nuance here. I think if I was ignoring late initiative control, then Dance of Daggers is a clear standout, especially for that bottom action. And this is something I'm definitely going to want to test, particularly when the ranged build looks like it's quite good this time around, and with a previously mentioned level 9 card I'm very excited about. So I think for most people, Dance of Daggers is a great pick. And then going back for a level 5 or level 4 card, Gruesome Advantage, Serrated Arrows, Duelists Advance, something like that is also a great option here. Level 7, our first option is Spring the Trap. Top action can be performed while stunned. You then remove negative conditions that you have. You then perform a heal 5 self. Being stunned will come up maybe once or twice in the campaign, provided you aren't running into stun traps. Removing all negative conditions before the heal has some value, as of course you get to remove poison, so then you actually get access to the full 5 points of healing. If this was a bottom action, I would be significantly more excited for it, as of course your top action is more premium because it is your damaging action most of the time. So spending your top action to be defensive and reactive on a level 7 card isn't necessarily great. Heal 5 at this point also isn't particularly noteworthy. So there's some definite problems with this action. I do like that it at least adds another facet to the class. But overall, it is not particularly efficient at anything it does. I've also just never been a fan of actions that like remove conditions and heal yourself, especially as a high level top action. I would be much rather proactive and kill the monsters before they apply those negative conditions to start with. Initiative 13 here is fine. It's good for the top half, good for the bottom. Again, noteworthy on basically any other class, but on Silent Knife it's just fine. But obviously far better than 40s, 50s, 60s, as mentioned before. The bottom is a very wordy move 5 jump. You designate one adjacent trap, perform the move 5 jump. You can then relocate a designated trap to an adjacent featureless hex. If that hex is occupied by an enemy, spring the trap on that enemy and gain 1 experience. This will usually boil down to being a move 5 jump. The other 2 parts of it are fully optional. It is good when you can trigger it, as Gloomhaven does have a decent amount of traps. So I think this is definitely the stronger of the 2 actions here on Spring the Trap. And the fact that it's just a move 5 jump in Initiative 13 is totally reasonable. And on most classes, I'd be pretty happy with that. But of course, as mentioned so often in this review so far, the Silent Knife's mobility is truly second to none. And really, this is just fine at this point. If you can somehow always get the trap pulled off, perhaps you're paired with a really trap-focused Tinkerer or something like that, then this gains a lot of value, as adding true damage and maybe a condition to your move action is very, very good. The other option here is Stiletto Storm. It's an attack 2, target 2, range 3, so literally throwing knives from level 1. However, if all the targets of the attack ability were adjacent to none of their allies, perform attack 2, target 2, range 3, which essentially echoes or copies the main ability. This has a massive gulf between being essentially unplayable at this point, or at least very weak, to being possibly your best non-loss attack on the class, at least until level 9. So you're going to absolutely need to look for scenarios where you can fulfill the condition of the double isolation. Because this is a range attack, again, this is easier than doing this in melee, and you have had access to some amount of pull. This is also the kind of card that was something like paired with the Bruiser, who has a lot of push, does get easier. And this is absolutely a good payoff for working with the Silent Knife's themes at this point. Obviously, making 4 attack 2s where you can double up and hit the same target twice is pretty powerful at this point. Works so well with poison, works well with access to pierce that you may have. It always gives an experience regardless. And at very worst, you can simply replace throwing knives with this because it is strictly better. At this point, whether or not you're running throwing knives is probably pretty debatable, but if you're in the range build, there is a chance you still might be doing so. Initiative 80 here is late. It's not as late as some of the cards we've been offered previously, but I like that this is here simply because some people may be struggling with their initiative control at this point, probably myself included. So this is a nice pickup. And honestly, the isolation thing tends to happen slightly more often near the end of rounds in the larger party sizes, like what I'm used to. So this is definitely not a knock against the card, and it's very easy to pair it up with a fast one when that lines up as well. Bottom is a really nice, clean move 3, attack 3. I love that if the top action isn't great, you have a really solid bottom action here. So really, this has 3 good, solid dimensions to it. It's hard to find too much to dislike about Stiletto Storm. Obviously, if the top never happens, it does lose some value, but I do find that hard to believe with ranged enemies and the ability to manipulate monsters. Another thing that I haven't talked about is just the fact that 2 of the starting 6, namely the Mind Thief and the Bruiser, have really good access to monster repositioning. So you are pretty likely, if you start with this class, to have an ally to help you with this. So it's not just the Bruiser. Even the Tinkerer has some access to some push and pull for their own traps. So this is something that at face value is probably easier to pull off than it looks, which again makes this card better. So for me, I think Spring the Trap has a highly conditional top and a reasonable bottom action on a good initiative. It is pretty close to a move 5 jump a lot of the time that has a bailout of a heal 5. This is definitely more party and composition based, If you have very little access to healing and have an ally that can consistently put out traps, this definitely improves. But at a baseline, this is quite poor at this point. Whereas Stiletto Storm, I find, has a much better bottom action, a similarly powerful but conditioned top, and a better initiative for Silent Knife, needing some late ones when you have such good early access in the control spectrum for initiative. So for me, this is a pretty easy Stiletto Storm pick. You could also go back for a previous level, but I think at this point you've probably potentially already done that once. So I think in a vacuum, Stiletto Storm top works well for a range build. The bottom is a great bailout and it's good for the melee build. So overall, this card has enough going on where I'm quite happy with it. At level 8, our first option is Crippling Poison. This is a persistent loss ability that adds poison to all your attacks. And then you also get +1 to all of your attacks target enemies that have poison. Because this is the exact same text that poison has by default, this effectively doubles the effect of poison. I really like that this doesn't specify ranged attacks, ranged or melee attacks at all, so this applies to everything that you do. This is such a nice intersection between a bunch of different builds for the Silent Knife, as of course this is kind of the keystone to your poison sub build. And this works really well in the ranged build because you make so many smaller attacks that then apply the poison and then double the effect of the poison. When you're doing a lot of attack 2s and attack 3s, turning them into 4s and 5s before perk modifiers is really powerful. And this is one of the only cards that I can see on Silent Knife where you want to put it up on round 1 as a loss, except that you're going down to an 8-card hand and just simply gain so much value from it. I do think this is powerful enough where this is actually a good option for many Silent Knives. It's just hard to understate how good this is for the range build. This definitely is not nearly as exciting for the melee build unless you have taken as many bottom attacks as possible, as when you're only doing one bigger attack per round, this is significantly worse. If you have any way to multi-attack every round, this is a good loss and is definitely worth considering just putting up in the first round of many scenarios. So the thing we'll want to keep in mind here is both the initiative and the bottom half to see how good this card is when that's not reasonable. Perhaps in a longer scenario where you simply can't leverage only having 8 cards, or at higher difficulties where losing a card plus this persistent loss means that you will exhaust too quickly. Initiative 4 here is obviously fantastic. It is kind of funny if you do plan on primarily using this for the top half, as this is actually a downside. Usually when you're putting up a persistent loss in round 1, you do not want to go quickly, because then you are often the focus of monsters. And if you're planning on moving in after you put up the persistent ability, you just take a bunch of hits for no reason. So this is a slight knock against the card. It is a big reason to have taken a later initiative at one of your previous level ups, but I think at this point you probably should have at least 1, 2, or 3 cards that you're running that are still late initiatives. So if you're playing this for the loss, this shouldn't be a massive problem. It's just something to note. The bottom being a move 3, you add Immobilize to all attacks, targeting enemies adjacent to none of their allies this round. This is really our only instance of hard crowd control that Silent Knife has had consistent access to. The conditioning restriction here for isolation at this point is mostly trinket text. This should be something that you're actively looking for on essentially every turn anyways, as a large portion of your cards want this. And Immobilize is really, really nice, particularly for a ranged focused Silent Knife, as it means that it's so easy to have your party evade a bunch of attacks simply by the melee monsters not being able to move into the right position. This is also really nice at Initiative 4 because you can guarantee that the Immobilize will have its greatest chance of being effective as early in the round as possible. So I do love that Crippling Poison has a very solid persistent loss top, and that is unusual for me as I am very much against early turn losses in general. But also paired with a great initiative and a bottom action that gives us access to some hard control, kind of fixing a deficiency of this class or a weakness, tied with that initiative 4 here. So very, very good card. Happy to see it. Our other option is Visage of the Inevitable. This is a melee attack 4, and you add Disarm and gain Invisibility and 1 experience if the target is both adjacent to any of your allies and none of its allies. So we got the double whammy of both conditions here with isolation and ally adjacency. An attack 4 here is below par, so you need to be fulfilling both conditions essentially every time with this. With that being said, this is a very high quality defensive ability for the Silent Knife to get access to, as both disarm and invisibility are high quality, very rare conditions. Invisibility giving you 2 turns of safety, and disarm is really nice here because it actually gives your allies some safety on the turn when you aren't there to take hits. Initiative 88 here is decidedly a little awkward with this effect. Invisibility often wants to go as quickly as possible. Disarm being nebulous, you don't really know if it's going to be relevant or not, but usually disarming quick is a better option. However, at this point, I don't think it's going to be a huge ask to go quickly with this class. You have access to so many fast initiatives, and it would be bizarre to not have good access at this point. You would have to take extremely specific card choices and not be running any of your fast ones from level 1 at this point. So not a huge deal overall, and having access to late initiatives is sometimes quite nice, even if it doesn't work with the card itself. And the bottom, again, usually wants to go fast. It is a move 3, poison all adjacent to you within range 1. This is ironically really nice with crippling poison, your other level 8, but in general suits the melee Silent Knife really well, as does the top, and is just a good solid action, although a little unexciting at this point in your career being a level 8. It's definitely awkward that its best use case is with the other level 8. I do not believe I've ever advocated for taking both level 8s before. This will not be my first time of doing it either, as I think both level 9s are quite powerful and definitely very cool for the class, so I just can't rationalize skipping 9s to make both 8s work better when I think they're both already solid cards. So for me at this level, I think Visage of the Inevitability is very solid, bread and butter card with 2 good halves. The bottom, as mentioned before, not quite as good at this point. It's incredible, but somehow Crippling Poison to me seems like a really great pick. It's exciting enough and feels very keystone for both the ranged build and the sub build for Poison. It's such a great payoff for both of those. I like a lot that the initiative on it is so good with a reasonable bottom half that even when the scenario you are in cannot really reasonably accommodate a loss on turn 1, this card still performs well, and Immobilize is such a nice tool for the Silent Knife to get easy access to. Made it to the top. Our first level 9 here is Hired Help. This has a literal paragraph of text as a persistent loss. You may lose one of your money tokens to place a character token on an adjacent normal enemy. For the remainder of the scenario, that enemy is an ally to you and an enemy to all other monsters. You may replace its base with a blue base to more easily identify it. When that enemy dies, it drops an additional money token. Time to get some friends, in other words. This is very reminiscent of a Blinkblade level 9 card that did almost exactly the same thing. Probably a flavorful callback to that, as you are just bribing the monster. The monster only being normal, needing to be adjacent as well, is a little awkward, and was going to vary quite a bit based on the monster types you have available in the scenario. There are some monster types this is very strong with, even as a normal. Things like Chaos Demons, Living Spirits, and both flavors of the Savas. Ice Storm, and I believe Lava Walker is what they're called. So I think this is the kind of loss that will be more situational, but very powerful in the right kind. It also creates a sub-game where you need to protect the monster to get as much value out of it as possible. So definitely very neat and fairly unique outside of that Blinkblade 9 they've done once before. Definitely a lot of fun as well. Initiative 2 here is again funny for the top. It is absurd with the bottom half, so I'm on board. At least with the top half initiative 2, you know that the monster is going to immediately do something of value for you. So that definitely has a bit of text here. And the move 2 is honestly very important for the bottom, so that is good. Bottom is a move 4, disarm at range 1. Finally, we get access to disarm, and with a good, simple move action, once again, this will play best with the melee build, as you can disarm an adjacent monster, and then ideally hit and maybe kill the other one. This works fine for range build as well, because you can hit and then kill something and then move in and disable something else. So overall, this is just one of the best solid staple actions you can get. You don't really get move disarms really. Mind Thief has a little bit of move and stun, but it's conditional on an ice consumption on 2 cards. So this having absolutely no conditions on it is definitely a step above that. Our other option here is Watch It Burn. It's an attack 2 all adjacent enemies, wound, immobilize. If you attacked at least 3 enemies with the attack ability, gain 1 experience and perform move 3 jump, infuse the fire. This is a great pinnacle card for this class as it works with pretty much anything else you can do. Crippling Poison top works amazing with it. Visage bottom, Dance of Daggers bottom to give all these attacks advantage. Attacking all adjacent enemies with Wound and Immobilize is such a nasty combo, as when done properly, the monster loses this turn and takes 2 damage, 1 on this turn, 1 on the next from the wound before they're able to actually do anything. So it's kind of like an attack 4 all adjacent with some delay on half the damage. This also just scales so well with your fantastic perk deck, and has just so many ways to crank up the damage as mentioned above. This will play a lot better than it may initially look. The fact that you get to move 3 jump if you're hitting at least 3 targets afterwards just is really icing on the cake here, as it immediately solves that problem of, oh, well, maybe I had to move in to hit them. And so the immobilize isn't going to be relevant. They're just going to turn around and hit me. No, if you do this right, you just get to move away anyways and kind of cackle as you get away with literally robbing them blind. This is just so incredibly powerful. The fire infusion again is just trinket text for you and maybe relevant for allies. Initiative 98 here is definitely a foil to Hired's Help 2, as they add up to exactly 100. At this point, you can absolutely just pair this with a fast action the vast majority of the time, and you can use it for the 98 when you want to like clean up a room that's almost finished and just kind of do it late in the round to try and save yourself some damage. The bottom is possibly the most unique line of text I've ever seen in a Haven game. I know I said something similar earlier, but this is truly one of a kind. During your turn, you may play this card from your hand to perform this action in addition to the 2 cards you played for the round, attack 5 melee, with an enhancement pip in case you're a millionaire. This very much takes the overall balance and way to play Haven and turns it on its head. You are limited with 2 cards per turn, notwithstanding some very specific items we've seen in the past. So this is effectively giving you a 3rd action that you can do anytime in your turn, with it being a melee attack 5, is so cool and is honestly so neat and is breaking new ground with this game. With that being said, it is just an attack 5 with no other bells and whistles on it, but it's also free from your hand, and that's of course extremely hard to evaluate when we haven't really had something like this before. Overall, I think it's probably a little worse than the top because the top is such a strong area action, but there are absolutely situations where you're just going to kind of slam down 2 cards and then be like, actually, I kind of want an attack 5 on this turn as well, and just kind of throw this card in. And the first time you do it, your allies are going to be absolutely puzzled with you and be like, what are you talking about? That's not how this game works. And no, for this card, that is how this game works. So it's really, really cool. I love the fact that this has a ton of flexibility tied to it, because you can just simply choose to do this on any given turn, which I think is a lot of the power baked into this. Regardless, the card's great. I think probably from the discussion of this, you probably know which card I'm leaning towards in Watch It Burn. I think both halves are fantastic. It's a 98 on initiative. It's basically as late as you can go without long resting. The top half is incredibly powerful and explosive. The bottom half is literally something I've never seen before and is something I need to desperately test to see how good it is, because I have a hunch it is incredible and I want to see if that's right. With that being said, I think Hired Help is super cool. If we hadn't had the top text before, In Blinkblade, I think I'd be really on board with trying this. As it is fairly situationally dependent for a 9. I think a lot of the time you're going to use this as a move forward disarm initiative too, which is great. It's just not as fun as the other level 9 in Watch It Burn for me. But I would not fault anyone for taking it at extremely high difficulties. It might even be the pick, because a move forward disarm is frankly insane. Silent Knife's perk deck ended up being in a similar spot to Mind Thieves in first edition. Very good, consistent with some great modifiers, good rolling invisibilities and things like that. This does look to be very similar, with the only negative modifier you keep aside from the omnipresent null being a single 0. The removed -2 straight up is uncommon. This usually replaces it with a 0. So this is very good and even better than on other classes, as bloating your deck with a 0 obviously isn't ideal. Same with the remove 2 -1s. That usually comes with 2 +1s, which at very high levels, plus a generic +1 actually isn't all that great. So getting rid of 2 -1s, just full stop, is fantastic. You also get to remove the remainder of your -1s by replacing with +1s. This is more standard and is usually a pretty high pick. For me, past those pretty early ones, I really like the +1, replace a +1 with a +1 invisible rolling, as you're not only deck thinning by removing a -1, but also deck thinning by adding in a rolling modifier. But a +1 invisible is very powerful, and you'll be attacking on this class often enough to hit these fairly often, and they really do feel like get out of jail free cards. The replace zeros with +1s gain a money token if this targeted an adjacent enemy is pretty solid. Again, better for melee than ranged, as you're just not going to meet the condition with ranged all that often. Whereas the replace zeros with +2s is very nice with smaller attacks. So I think those are a bigger priority for the ranged build. The +1 disarms are also very good, as simply getting hard CC attached to your attack is really nice when it doesn't finish them off. So overall, the perks that work with your attack modifier deck are all of a high quality and none of them are weak picks, which really does speak to the flexibility and versatility of the Silent Knife's perk deck. Let's talk about the 3 non-attack modifiers here, as I do think they're all quite interesting. The first is at the end of each of your rests, you may place a money token in the hex occupied by an enemy within range 3 to perform attack 1, targeting that enemy within range 3. Of the 3, this is probably the one I'm least excited about. It's only an attack 1, only within range 3, and you must place one of your money tokens there, which usually means you're just losing gold, as you're unlikely or less likely to be able to go back and grab the money token back. Although, because maybe you're killing them, maybe they're dropping a second one, I'm not enthused about a perk that is conditional in multiple ways and also is only an attack 1. However, with how good your perk modifier deck is, this is probably pretty solid later on in your career, so it's just simply not a high pick, but will definitely have some value. The next one is whenever you complete a city event, draw an attack modifier card as though you were performing an attack 4. Gain an amount of gold equal to the damage this attack would have dealt. This is very neat and novel. Early on, this is going to be an attack 3 or 4. Gain that much gold due to your attack modifier deck on average. This is also very interesting in the tension it creates, because you want to take this early on to maximize the gold you're getting out of it, but the later in your career you are, the better your attack modifier deck gets and the more gold you gain from this. So this is probably for people who want a lot of money on this class, something like a second, third, or maybe fourth pick. But I really do like the option here, as I think Silent Knife scales so well with gold based on items and enhancements. This is a really neat ability, and can definitely get you something like probably 80 to 100 gold fairly easy in your career. Although that is going to vary a lot. It could be as low as something like 40 or 50 if you retire fairly quickly or roll poorly. So there's some variance there. The last perk being your double check mark. Once each scenario, during your turn, you may perform Invisible Self. This is another get out of jail free card for 2 rounds, this one and the next one. This is significantly more consistent than the rolling Invisible Selves. However, as a double check mark, it's not exactly a slam dunk. At high difficulties, this could absolutely be a high pick, and holds a lot of value as you can simply decide when to do this in a given scenario. I do really like this. For me, this is an early to mid pick. I would guess around pick 5, pick 6 for me, as ultimately I want to make my attack modifier deck a little better yet, especially when this class attacks so often, but this is something I definitely value. For the masteries here, we have two, of course. The first, for an entire scenario, only attack enemies that are adjacent to one of your allies and adjacent to none of their allies, sorry, or adjacent to none of their allies, and perform at least 10 attacks. Great, simple way to showcase the mastery of Silent Knife. Make at least 10 attacks, make them always be isolated or ally adjacent. This, of course, just pairs so well with what you're already doing. This is probably of a moderate to high difficulty. However, because it's something that you're already going to be looking out for, that does make this a little easier and a little bit more palatable, and is definitely just a good showcase of mastery in general. The other one is pretty funny. And 3 scenarios with at least 12 or more money tokens. This is going to be something that you're going to want to try and do in slightly easier or lower complexity scenarios, so you aren't kind of hampering your allies by maybe taking some inefficient actions to get some gold. With the right card choices, not only at level 1, but also just at level ups, this is going to be fairly reasonable. I like that you just have to do this 3 times over the course of your career as this class. You can kind of track in your notes section, showing kind of the 2 main facets of this class. I like this one. I like that it's pretty easy to achieve over a period of time. So overall, I think Silent Knife's Masteries are definitely a bit of a home run here and should be pretty reasonable to achieve for the many. Even if they're not the easiest, they're pretty reasonable. So that about wraps it up for this time here. Next up is going to be the Bruiser, and then after that we'll round out these with the Tinkerer, last but not least. Thanks again if you stuck through all the way to the end here, and we'll see you next time.